You know that feeling when you finally hit six figures in net worth? When you check your accounts, savings, retirement, investments, whatever you've got, and the total actually crosses $100,000 for the first time? It's this weird mix of pride and exhaustion, honestly, because getting there probably took you years. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe longer if life threw you some curveballs along the way. And you look at that number and you think, okay, cool, only $900,000 to go until I'm a millionaire. And it feels impossible, right? Like, if it took you 8 years to get the first $100,000, then the second 100 grand is going to take another 8 years, which means you'll be a millionaire sometime around your 73rd birthday, which is less than ideal. Except here's the thing that nobody really prepares you for, the thing that sounds almost too good to be true until you experience it yourself. Your second $100,000 doesn't take 8 years. It doesn't even take 4 years. If you keep doing roughly what you've been doing, the same savings rate, the same investment strategy, the same financial habits that got you to six figures in the first place, your second $100,000 will appear in a fraction of the time, sometimes literally a fifth of the time. My name is Jack, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, wealth, psychology, and specifically, the mathematical and behavioral patterns that separate people who build significant wealth from people who stay stuck at the same financial level for decades. And one of the most fascinating patterns I've observed, both in my own life and in the lives of hundreds of people I've studied and talked to, is this acceleration effect that happens once you cross certain wealth thresholds. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's a combination of mathematical forces, psychological shifts, and compounding effects that all align once you've built that initial foundation of capital. But it feels like magic when you're experiencing it. It feels like suddenly, after years of grinding and scraping and watching every dollar, money starts to accumulate almost on its own. And the really interesting part? Most people don't believe this until they see it happening in their own accounts. They hear about compound interest in theory, they nod along to the explanations, but they don't really internalize what it means until they watch their net worth climb $10,000 in a single month without them doing anything special, until they realize that their investments made more money last quarter than they did from their actual job. So if you're somewhere in that first $100,000 journey, whether you're at $20,000 or $50,000 or $85,000 and you're feeling exhausted by how long it's taking, this is for you. Because understanding why the second 100 grand comes so much faster doesn't just make you feel better about the timeline. It actually changes how you approach money right now, in ways that can accelerate your progress even further. The math that changes everything. Let's start with the thing that makes this entire phenomenon possible. The compound interest curve is exponential, not linear. And I know you've heard that before, but I don't think most people really understand what it means in practical terms. When you have $10,000 invested and it earns 8% in a year, you make $800. Cool. When you have $100,000 invested at the same 8% return, you make $8,000. That's literally 10 times more money from the exact same percentage return doing the exact same amount of work, which is to say, no work at all. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's say you're saving $1,000 a month and investing it. In year 1, you've got roughly $12,000 invested by the end of the year. At 8% returns, that generates about $480 in investment gains. So your total net worth grows by $12,480, mostly from your contributions, barely anything from returns. But fast forward to when you've already got $100,000 invested and you're still contributing that same $1,000 a month. Now you're adding $12,000 in contributions, sure, but your existing $100,000 is generating $8,000 in returns, so your net worth grows by $20,000 that year. You're doing the exact same thing, saving the same amount every month, but you're accumulating wealth nearly twice as fast just because you have a bigger base to work from, and then the next year, you've got $120,000 invested. Now that generates $9,600 in returns, plus your $12,000 in contributions, So you're growing by $21,600. The year after that, $23,328. The snowball is rolling downhill and it's picking up speed. I remember the exact moment this clicked for me. I was looking at my investment account and I noticed that I'd gained $2,400 in a single month. Not from contributions, I'd only added my usual $800 that month. The other $1,600 was just market appreciation, my investments, making money. And I thought, wait, my portfolio just made double what I contributed, and I didn't do anything except not panic and sell. That's when I understood that I'd crossed some invisible threshold. I was no longer in the phase where wealth building is about grinding out savings. I was in the phase where wealth building becomes about protecting and maintaining what you've already built, while it does increasingly heavy lifting on its own. This is the fundamental mathematical reason your second $100,000 is so much faster. You're not starting from zero anymore. You're starting from $100,000, which means every percentage point of return generates real, substantial dollar amounts. An 8% year when you have $5,000 invested is $400. An 8% year when you have $100,000 invested is $8,000. Same year, same returns, wildly different outcome. And if you're still contributing fresh savings on top of that, you're essentially getting a double boost. Your contributions are buying assets, and your existing assets are appreciating, and both of those are happening simultaneously. It's like rowing a boat downstream instead of upstream. You're still rowing, you're still putting in effort, but now the current is working with you instead of against you. The psychological barrier most people face is that when they have $30,000 or $50,000 saved, they can't really feel this effect yet. The returns are still relatively small. A great year in the market might net them $4,000 or $5,000, which is nice, but not life-changing. So they think the whole compound interest thing is kind of overblown. But what they don't realize is that they're building the foundation that will eventually produce enormous returns. That $50,000 needs to become $100,000 before the magic really kicks in. And then $100,000 needs to become $200,000. And each doubling happens faster than the last, because the base keeps getting bigger. This is why Charlie Munger used to say the first $100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it. He understood that crossing that threshold is the hard part, the slow part, the part that requires pure discipline and grinding. But once you're there, the math starts working in your favor in ways that genuinely accelerate your progress. Your money finally has a job. Here's something that sounds obvious, but is actually kind of profound. When you have $3,000 in a savings account, your money is just sitting there. It's not doing anything. It's not working. It's basically unemployed capital that occasionally earns maybe 0.5% interest if you're lucky, which amounts to like $15 a year. Congrats! But when you have $100,000 properly invested, your money has a full-time job. It's out there in the economy, in businesses, in real estate, in bonds, in index funds tracking the entire market. It's working for you while you sleep, while you're at your actual job, while you're on vacation, while you're doing literally anything else. And this employed capital generates income. Not a lot at first, relatively speaking, but enough that it becomes noticeable. If you've got $100,000 in a diversified portfolio averaging 8% annual returns, that's $8,000 a year in investment income. That's $667 a month. That's more than some people's rent. That's a decent side hustle, except you're not doing anything, except leaving your money alone. I think people underestimate how psychologically different it feels when your net worth starts growing from investment returns, instead of just from savings. When you're in the early stages, let's say you have $20,000 saved, you check your accounts, and you see your balance went up by $500. You think, oh, cool, I must have gotten paid and transferred some to savings. Your net worth growth is directly tied to your labor. But when you have $150,000 invested, and you check your accounts and see your balance went up by $3,000, you know it's not from your paycheck. You contributed your usual $1,000 this month, so where did the other $2,000 come from? It came from your capital doing its job. It came from businesses growing, dividends being paid, real estate appreciating, bonds accruing interest. This shift from wealth building being about your labor to wealth building being about your capital is huge. It fundamentally changes the game you're playing. When I crossed $100,000, I started noticing that some months my investment returns were bigger than my actual paycheck contributions. I'd save $1,200 from my salary, but my portfolio would grow by $2,800 total because of market appreciation. And that was the first time I really understood what it means to have wealth. Not just money, but wealth capital that generates returns independent of your time and effort. The second $100,000 comes faster, partly because your capital is now a significant contributor to your net worth growth. In the first $100,000, maybe 90% of your accumulation came from saving money from your paycheck. In the second $100,000, maybe only 60% comes from your paycheck, and 40% comes from investment returns. You're literally doing less work to achieve the same result. And this is where people sometimes feel guilty, like they're somehow cheating or it's unfair that money makes money. But this is literally how wealth has worked for centuries. This is the entire point of building capital. You trade your labor for money, you convert that money into productive assets, and then those assets generate returns that compound over time. The reason most people never experience this is that they never build enough capital for it to matter. They spend everything they earn, or they keep their savings in cash earning nothing, or they give up before they hit the threshold where investment returns become significant. But if you can just get to that first $100,000, if you can just cross that line where your capital starts pulling its weight, the game changes completely. You're no longer solely dependent on your ability to save from your paycheck. You've got this other engine running in the background, quietly building wealth for you. The expense ratio flips. Alright, here's something I don't think gets talked about enough. Your expenses are roughly fixed, but your income and wealth can grow dramatically, and this creates a mathematical advantage that accelerates over time. When you're making $50,000 a year, and your basic expenses are $40,000, you've got $10,000 to save. That's a 20% savings rate, which is actually pretty good. But when you're making $80,000 a year, and your expenses have only crept up to maybe $48,000 because you lifestyle inflated a bit, you've now got $32,000 to save. That's a 40% savings rate from the same amount of discipline. What happened? Your income grew by 60%, but your expenses only grew by 20%. The gap widened, and that gap is where wealth building happens. And here's the thing. This expense-to-income ratio keeps getting better over time if you're even remotely careful about lifestyle inflation. Your rent might go up 3% a year. Your car payment is fixed. Your groceries might increase with inflation. But your income? If you're developing skills, switching jobs strategically, getting raises, moving into higher-paying roles, your income can grow 5%, 10%, sometimes 20% in a single year. I know someone who went from making $65,000 at age 28 to making $95,000 at age 31 just by switching companies twice. Their rent went from $1,400 to $1,600 in that same period. Their car payment stayed the same. Their student loans actually went down as they paid them off. So their expenses went from maybe $45,000 to $50,000, but their income went from $65,000 to $95,000. That's a savings potential increase from $20,000 a year to $45,000 a year. They more than doubled their savings capacity while their lifestyle barely changed. And that extra $25,000 a year in savings capacity, that's the second $100,000 showing up in like 4 years instead of 8. This is why your second $100,000 accumulates faster even if investment returns were somehow zero. Just from income growth and controlled expenses, you're able to save at a higher rate. But combine that with investment returns on your existing $100,000, and you've got two forces working in your favor simultaneously. The first $100,000 is hard because you're usually earning it during a period of your life when your income is relatively low and your expenses are relatively high as a percentage of income. You're early in your career, you're dealing with student loans, you're paying rent in expensive cities, you're buying all the stuff you need to adult furniture, work clothes, a reliable car. But by the time you're working on your second $100,000, you're usually a few years further into your career. You've gotten some raises, you've paid off some debt, you already own the couch, and the work clothes, and the car. Your income has grown, but your expense structure has stabilized. I hit $100,000 in net worth when I was about 31. At that point, I was making around $72,000, and my expenses were roughly $50,000 a year, so I was saving maybe $22,000 annually. 3 years later, I was making $94,000 and my expenses had crept up to maybe $56,000, so I was saving $38,000 a year. That's a 73% increase in savings rate from basically just normal career progression and not letting my lifestyle inflate proportionally. And this created a situation where, obviously the second $100,000 came faster. I was throwing way more cash at it every year, plus my existing $100,000 was generating returns. It wasn't even close to the same timeline. The lesson here is that if you're in your 20s or early 30s and you're struggling to save because your income just isn't that high yet, this will likely get easier. Not because saving gets easier as a discipline, but because the math gets easier. The gap between what you earn and what you need to spend typically widens over time, assuming you're making reasonable career moves and not inflating your lifestyle every time you get a raise. Your second $100,000 is faster, partly because you're probably earning more and saving more by the time you're working on it. It's just math. When I finally paid off those loans completely, I suddenly had an extra $250 a month that wasn't spoken for. But more importantly, I had an extra $70. Thank you guys, don't forget to subscribe.